you end up without the margin that you need to be able to try new things. So you can kind of be consumed with doing everything and you lack any kind of margin, any ability to respond quickly, to try something new if you need to. So in order to make that successful, you're going to have to find things like Craig said, you're going to have to stop doing, things that you're doing now or things that you were doing before. And so as a church, we've actually done that a few different times. One thing, a few years ago, we made a decision that we were going to focus what we did into 5 key things. So we were going to do weekend worship, we were going to do kids ministry, youth ministry, missions, and small groups. We're going to be the 5 areas. So we're going to have men's ministry, we're going to have women's ministry, we're going to have, college ministry. Some of those things could happen in the context of our small groups. And those are great things. We don't do sports ministry. We don't do, several things that churches do really, really well. It just wasn't who we were called to be as a church. And we were doing some of those things. We just weren't doing them well. And so we said, let's focus in and do these 5 things. And what that's done is it's given us margin in terms of resources, financial resources, people resources, leadership resources, in order to try new things that others weren't doing or that we couldn't otherwise do. And so it's just one of the mindsets that go behind kind of trying to make sure we created enough margin, enough space for us to be able to respond quickly to kind of different situations. Another thing that's a mindset is a sense of urgency. I talked before, you mentioned how there were 6.8 billion people that are alive today. If you've ever looked at a population curve, how many of you have ever seen kind of a population growth curve? A few of you? Okay. So if you imagine that this is sort of 2,000 years ago, there's a line right here. This would be great to put on a slide, I suppose, but I'm going to do it this way. This will be more interesting. So here's a line right here, 2,000 years ago. The population's right here. If you kind of go across 2,000 years, it's pretty flat, just slightly increasing, slightly increasing. You get right over here to about 1960, 1970, 1980, and it begins to do this. And then here we are today, and it's doing this. And what's interesting, it's almost like straight up. And what's fascinating is that we could have been alive, any of us. God could have put us on this planet at this segment of time, or this segment of time, or this segment of time, but He's put us here right now. And so it doesn't, we used to really think that this was kind of like this massive opportunity, because here we are alive and there's more people on this planet than ever before. But not only that, but we're more connected to the population than we've ever been before. I mean, the number of people with mobile technology, the number of people that have access to the internet and the rate at which that's growing, we actually have the ability to communicate, travel, talk to people, this global population, more so than they've ever had in history. And it just so happens that there's more people than there have ever been in history. So we have this opportunity to do that. But we've actually, when we really look at it in that context, like God's placed us here on this planet at this unique time, for us it's not just an opportunity, it's actually a responsibility that we have. We really feel like it's a responsibility we have to share Christ with this world. And so that's part of the reason that we leverage technology the way that we do, is because we really feel like God's placed us here at this time for this purpose, to share Christ with this world. So enough about us. I'll talk about you, not you specifically, but I'll talk about you in terms of pastors and church leaders, because I've talked to several pastors and church leaders around the world and asked them lots of questions and talked to them. One of the things that I've heard from several, and I'm sure it's not you, is they say, we really can't innovate. We try, but we just can't seem to our church, we can't innovate. And so I always ask the question, why? And some of the responses that I've received back are, 1, a resistance to change, 2, a lack of facilities. We just don't have the building or the facility to do it. Lack of personnel, lack of vision, which is kind of interesting, but that's what some people say, we just lack the vision. Our senior leadership just doesn't have the vision to a lack of empowerment. Sometimes people that aren't in senior leadership or the senior pastoral managers, I'm not empowered to do anything. That's why we can't really change. Lack of finances. And, basically, it goes on and on. Lack of blank is sort of what we hear. And, another way to describe all those is that those are constraints. Those are things that we're saying are constraining us from being able to innovate. You've heard the phrase before of thinking outside the box. It's kind of a phrase that we've used in the past. I've heard teams mention a lot. So we just need to think outside the box. And what we've actually found is that innovation actually happens inside of constraints. It's not out of the box thinking, it's actually sort of in the box thinking that causes innovation to happen. Craig mentioned it earlier, many times those constraints are real, and sometimes those constraints are actually artificial. What I mean by that is sometimes you really don't have a facility where more people can meet, and other times it's an artificial constraint. Like on our teams, there's times where I'll say, this is what the budget is to accomplish this task. I know we have more money that we could use to accomplish it, but the budget's going to be $10,000. And it's an artificial constraint. It's not a real one, but that constraint causes people to think differently. I'll give you an example. We were talking about how do we change our weekend worship experiences, because it seems like we sort of do things the same way. We've done it the same way for a year or two or three. Generally speaking, we do different things, but that was one of the concerns. And so we get in a meeting and people were saying, well, okay, if money wasn't an object and you could do anything, what would you do? And the problem is that the ideas really aren't that innovative because that's usually not the right way. I said, what if you could only do what we're doing now with half the amount of resource that we have to do it? How would you do it differently? And that really causes people to think differently because constraints actually do lead to innovation. In fact, if you had a lack of, then you probably are going to lack innovation. So you still have a lack at the end of the day because constraints help. I'll explain. Craig mentioned this earlier, but just in case you didn't get this equation, you can write it down here. It's limited resources plus increasing passion equals exponential innovation. And that's something that we really do see as a mindset. If we take limited resources because we never have enough resources. There's always seems like that we can have more. But we have increasing passion, a passion to reach people. Nothing is going to stop us. We're going to find a way where we really, really, really want to see more people reached. And that leads to innovation. And as Craig mentioned, God oftentimes guides by what he withholds as much or maybe more so than even guides by what he provides. And so those that you've heard earlier, but I want to reinforce it because that's our mindsets that affect how we leverage technology. Another chair. So did everybody up? Change seats?